I've just given my orchard a bit of an overhaul. Now my orchard is a really important part of the garden because one of my main objectives is to be self-sufficient. We've got our own meat, we've got cows which are there, we've got our pigs in the pigsty there, the lambs and sheep go in the woodland just over there, we have bees over there, and we have chickens which will probably pop into view in a minute. So this vegetable garden is behind me, and I've got the orchard either side. So the whole of the sort of productive garden meets at this point. And I really like that. And I like to make my productive garden as attractive as I can, because I think there's no reason that it has to look a bit like Steptoe's yard. I think a productive garden can be beautiful because the most eye-catching and beautiful elements, I think, to have around a garden are the livestock. I just love interacting with them, and every time I'm working in the veg beds I give them bits of old cabbage, carrots, apples, whatever, and they see me and they come over and I give them something, and I love that type of gardening. Now this is also quite a strange area in that there's a grass track that runs from the gates up there down through the medieval village, and I assume that was the old medieval road. And underneath the grass there's about that much soil, and then there's a hardcore road, and that's really useful because we use that access when we have to take livestock in or out, when we have to get lorries occasionally into the field, and that's a really good way of making a track seem softer. You don't have to see tarmac snaking through your garden, you can just have a lovely grass track. And when I've designed fire paths for fire engine access, sister blocks of flats and housing developments, we've often used that strategy. Now this space before was very different. Instead of this lovely area here now, I had some beautiful cloud fern box hedges, which I've had for about 20 years. They got really nice and big and buxom. But then in the last 2 or 3 years, they've got massive box blight. And I did spray them. I did spray them with Signum twice a year. And when Octave was allowed, I used that, but it really did not keep on top of it. And so they were becoming more of an eyesore. They were also quite hard work to trim and to keep nice. So I've gone for a much more laid back approach. And here I've used these pictorial meadows. Now you can just see them behind the framing there of the metal edge. Now I had the idea of using these, and these are meadows with no mowable grasses in it, so it's purely herbaceous plants in there, and I saw them in a client's garden and it looked absolutely stunning. She mows it once, possibly twice a year. She gets a massive colour from about April, May, right the way through to November plus. And I think they're just charming. But what I don't like so much about some of these meadows is they can look very overblown towards the end of the summer. They can have very scratty edges. So I've actually put in a raised metal edge to contain it on both sides, and I'm going to do ordinary grass up to the little seat. And I also had in my barn some bow-top steel fencing, just ornamental edging really, that I picked up in a sale a long time ago, maybe 30 years ago. And I've just given it a paint of our grey colour, mid-lead grey colour in the Zinza paint, which I painted straight onto the rusty work, and it holds really well. And then I got it tack welded on. Now have a look at Jamie Bullitt actually fitting and talking about this steel edging with me. Jamie here, so it's Jamie Bullitt. I love your name, Jamie. Jamie Bullitt, who is a steel fabricator, is making me some metal edge. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put some wildflower turf behind the metal edge, which is quite unusual because normally you use a metal edge to raise a grass lawn and then you can mow right up to the edge, but here I'm using it to contain the wildflower turf, and that's because I want it to look neat. Wildflower turfs usually look a bit random and I want to make it just a smidgen neater. Now Jamie, you've done a lot of metal edging and you're obviously good at curving it and things like that. So what size metal edge have we used here?
100 by 5, so it's 100mm tall, 5mm thick.
And so that would be the general size that you'd use in a garden for a domestic thing?
Yeah, pretty common. It's between 5mm and 3mm.
And if I was doing an edge of a drive and I had big lorries and things coming up, what size would you use for that?
Probably looking at 150 by 5 or even 150 by 6.
So a lot thicker, yeah. Now you see a lot of cor-ten steel everywhere, don't you? And it goes that lovely rusty colour. Well, it's instantly that rusty colour. This mild steel is about a third of the price of cor-ten steel, and it will go that rusty colour, but perhaps not quite so uniform.
No, I think the advantage of cor-ten is you don't get the leaching of rust. So if you're putting it on like a lime or a pale stone setup, you won't have to worry about that rust running off onto your stonework.
And another advantage of cor-ten, and cor-ten is the US Steel's trade name, isn't it, for atmospheric and pollution resistant metal.
Correct.
I've learnt it well. So how long will cor-ten steel last as opposed to my mild steel?
I think really it's still going to outlive us both. It's mainly just for that aesthetic look to it. But for a garden, mild steel is perfectly fine.
But you must admit that cor-ten steel would last longer.
Yeah.
So, I mean, both will outlive me.
Yeah.
But cor-ten steel might last for how long sort of period?
Probably an extra 20, 25 years.
Right, okay. But this will do me a good 20, 30 years.
For sure.
For sure.
Yeah.
Lovely. And so the disadvantage of cor-ten steel, obviously, is it's much more expensive, 3 times as much.
Yeah.
But it lasts longer. And why is it more expensive?
It's got copper in it, which is a main reason why it has increased their price. Plus, it's only made by one company, so they've got the monopoly on the market.
I see. Okay, so I've gone cheapskate and I've used this, but I'm really pleased with it. So you've made the curves, you've actually bent some of it by hand and some of it
Yeah, some of it we rolled, and then as we've changed the design slightly, we've just formed it using a tree or whatever else we could find just to use the steel to bend itself.
And we've just gone a little bit in the ground in most places, like a third of the 100mm is in the ground to make it stable. You've got pegs tacked on the front, but you're going to put the pegs down the back.
Yeah, so we've put 400mm long pins in, welded to the steel, so it's not going to go anywhere.
Right. And this whole job will have taken you maybe 5 hours, do you think, in total?
I think so, about that, yeah.
About that, right. So it's lovely. And what we've got here is this fancy mesh netting. And this I picked up in a sale years ago, and I've never really found a good use for it. And I just painted it with Zinsser paint, the colour grey. And Jamie is going to, you've never done this before.
No, not this one.
But you think it's going to be easy.
Yeah, we'll be able to tack that on, no worries.
Yeah, so Jamie's just going to tack it on the back, and it's just going to make it look a little bit more defined. And I think it's quite fun. And, well, I hope I'm right, but we'll see in a couple of hours anyway. Anyway, Jamie, we'll let you get on. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I'm just going to weld the backing plate to join these two bits of edging together. Okay, now we're going to attach the bow top edging to the mild steel edging.
When I laid the turf, when I wanted to get the kerf, it was really simple to cut. I just got a big old kitchen knife, something like you'd use to carve meat with, and I just literally cut it round, and it was a few seconds job. So I have to say it's a real pleasure to lay. Now, as I said, I've used two mixes here. I've got purple haze in the front, which has lots of blue and white flowers and is really beautiful. And that is fine for very dry areas or areas that occasionally flood. Now, this doesn't occasionally flood, but it does get pretty dry. And it flowers, yeah, I think from about May. I mean, they say in the brochure till September. Well, that's wrong, because we're now almost November, and I bet you it's going to be flowering in a couple of weeks' time. So I think it will go right on, if it's a warm autumn, probably till Christmas. And then at the back I've got super pollinator, and that's a massively good mix for insects, although I have to say they're all pretty good for insects. So there are a whole range of different turfs, and I'm just going to tell you which they all are. So the other ones are, there's treasure chest, there's woodland fringe, which, as you would expect, is in semi-shady areas, so maybe if you've got the edge of a woodland or a copse, that would be ideal. There's pollinator verge, which they use a lot on verges for roads. There's rain garden, when you get quite mass floodings and then the soil has to accommodate to being very wet and then quite dry. So that's a very moisture, high range tolerant one. There's patchwork quilt. There's Indian summer, which has a lot of flowers very late on in the year. And there's also botanical skyline. So if you download their brochure, you can see all the merits and what species are in all these different mixes. And I think it's going to be a method which many people will want to use. Maybe you've just got a couple of square meters in your garden, in the middle of your lawn, that you want to be a bit wild, or maybe just along a fringe of a path and you want to just have a wilder, colourful look. Then you could just use a few strips of this and it will be a really trouble-free way of having some wildflowers. Or maybe you want to go big and use huge areas, such as my client did. So what are these pictorial meadows? Well, they were developed by Professor Nigel Dunnett. And what he's done is basically he's grown many plants per square metre on this sort of biodegradable matting. This meadow consists of about 130, 140 plants per square metre. So they're grown on these mats that are 600 by 1.2 wide, so they come in like turfs. And there are about 30 to 40 different species within that mix. So I've got things like Achillea, I can see, I've got Verbascum, I've got many different plants, and each different type of the turf has obviously different things in it, different plants within it. Now they arrived on a pallet and they were just stacked up on top of each other, laid flat and stacked up. And they arrived on Friday night, it's now Monday, they arrived on Friday night at about 5 o'clock, and I unloaded them and I laid them. And I finished about, well, I was finishing by moonlight. Luckily it was a full moon and it got dark really quite early, about 7. And I'd finished laying this lot by 7. So that's unloading them, dragging them all the way down the track in a wheelbarrow and then laying them. So that took me maybe 3 hours, including a fair bit of unloading and dragging, wheelbarrowing. So that's pretty quick to lay, and I've never laid them before. But the beauty of them is that you don't have to be as precise as with turf, because they're more informal looking. If your joints aren't absolutely together and things, then it really isn't a problem. You just put them down as best as you can and they will soon really knit together. I'll pick up a bit now and you can have a look and see there. See, it comes up like that, and you can see the root hairs are now already starting to grow down. And the preparation for this is much simpler than turf. It was literally just soil there, so I pulled out the box, I lifted the roots out, so I cut them down first, then I lifted the roots out, and then I just raked it, and that's basically all I did. So it was a nice smooth bit of soil, and then I literally plonked each one on top of it. So it was a very simple operation. And of course, if you start a meadow like this by seed, which is really quite easy, but the problem is when you seed sow something like this, you would inevitably get quite a few weeds coming up. Even if it's quite clean, you'll get annuals and things coming through the topsoil. But this way, because you put the turf on top of the soil, you are suppressing any potential weed growth there pretty well. And the other huge benefit about these is people always seem to get into problems with having a meadow. Partly, I think, because perennial weeds, perennial flowers they will only start to flower in their second year. So they often ring me up and say, Bunny, I haven't got any flowers. But you know, this is just year one. They will not flower, most of them, in year one. But these, some of them, you can see are actually in flower now, and they've been down 2 days. And when they came on the pallet, because they were crushed on top of each other, they were slightly flattened. But now I see in 3 days, they've really perked up and they look incredibly healthy. I'm going to water it really well. We have had quite a lot of rain, but I'll make sure I keep them well watered for the first week, and then I'll just monitor them. But now it's autumn, we're end of October, the soil's still pretty warm, the growing season's good, so they should really get their roots down pretty quick. It's pretty ideal. So what I will do is I'll probably mow them once a year, these areas in probably March, April, something like that. You'll need to mow any flower area at least once a year, otherwise you will get sort of hawthorn and things like that potentially seeding into it. And I might just pep it up. I might just add some tulips randomly through here. I've got some Miss Wilmot ghost seedlings, so I might stud a few in those in. The beauty of this is you can add in what you like, and they will take pretty well in this area. And then when I have the front edge, when I've reseeded this bit, I'm just going to trim this bit with my strimmer, and that will be a very quick and easy job, and it will just keep the neat manicured apart from the more wilder look. So I think this is going to be a really lovely area. I know with any plant population such as this that there will be certain plants that will grow massively well, and there'll be others that will be overcome by other thugs. So some in this particular environment will just shrivel up and die, and some will do really well. So over the next 5 years, I expect to see a different set of plants to what I've got now, because you naturally will get that change. So what I'm also going to do is, if any nettles or creeping thistle come in from the meadow, then I'm going to pull them out. I'm going to actually monitor it and weed it. And I might, if I get any gaps in any areas, I don't think I will, or things that I don't like, I will then just start putting in herbaceous that I like. So I might put in alchemilla, or I might put in some nepeta, because if you think about it, most herbaceous plants in the wild are designed to be grazed by livestock. So many herbaceous plants will tolerate gentle mowing, which it will be maybe once or possibly twice a year. So I think this is a really exciting new area. I'm really looking forward to gardening it on a very laid-back style. It's going to be a lot less maintenance than what I had before. And as you can see, I've just picked up a little seat there from eBay, needless to say, and I think it was about 40 something pounds. I've painted the top to match in the blue, but it's actually made of treen, which is sort of all knobbly branches, which is a sort of arts and crafty, I think, type way they used wood, or maybe earlier. But I think it's really lovely. And then my roses in the 2 pots at the end, I also really like. So those pots are baseless. They're full of Mari Pavey, the low shrubby rose, and that has been flowering maybe since May, June, and I took the cuttings of that maybe a year and a half ago, and I think I put 5 or 6 cuttings in each pot. So you can see how easy it is for cuttings, and how it is that it just adds a little bit of a special flowery touch. So it's a bit of a mishmash, this orchard. But basically, it's an area I use every day when I go and see all the different livestock, and I really love it.